So today's presenters are Ben Gallo from Ongoing Operations. Ongoing Operations is a credit union service organization that's helping banks and credit unions with all of their technology needs. And we have Joe Gleinzer. Joe is the co-founder and chief product officer of TrustGrid. And today we're going to be talking about the next generation of networking for banks and credit unions. And Ben, I'll let you go ahead and take it from here.
Perfect. Thank you, Lance. Welcome, everybody. I thought I'd set the stage here a little bit, and what you're going to hear in the presentation today is really coming from a lot of the personal experiences from ongoing operations in the credit unions that we serve. A lot of what we've experienced and with TrustGrid and the conversations, they have been driven even harder by the COVID and the pandemic. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But really coming into and even before the pandemic, we and a lot of our credit unions were seeing continuing increases in regulation and issues with NCUA with increasing scrutiny. The security threats are ever becoming more numerous and from different locations. And then B, even before the pandemic, seeing a lot of shifting infrastructure. What I mean by that is we had more credit unions move to hosted cores, I believe, in the previous 2 years to 2020 that we'd seen in the 10 years before that. And in addition to moving the core, a lot of them moved infrastructure to cloud services like an ongoing operations as well. Additionally, we've seen more use of software as a service and applications that used to be in a data center and now are dispersed either across multiple data centers, service providers, and SaaS providers. And then finally, with that, the hybrid cloud, which is this use of in your data center with your SaaS providers, with MSPs, has really become the new normal. After COVID, or as we're seeing right now, most of our credit unions have decided to keep some of their workforce either working 100% from home or working a 3-2 schedule, where 2 days at home, 3 days in the office. Many of them have actually hired employees outside of the region, so there is no office for them to come back to. So having remote employees is here to stay for our industry, as well as the fact that now those remote employees are accessing applications from multiple locations. We just had a call earlier this week with a credit union that's having to deal with employees that are working from home, VPNing and remote desktoping into their workstation at work, and then trying to access their hosted Jack Henry core from that location. You've created a lot of additional security issues. You've created a lot of additional complexity. And you partner with that with the fact that the majority of the breaches that are coming in to credit unions and financial institutions are coming in through end user and end user activities on top of that. So from OGO's perspective, really what we've seen with trying to manage these dispersed networks and with the pandemic on top of has been just short of a nightmare with the previous infrastructure that we were using. When we had an issue, a lot of times you're just trying to debug, is it something in the office, maybe a server, a router. You've now added the additional complexity of a lot of these individuals working from home. And in many cases, our ticket volumes have quadrupled because we now have end users complaining that the server is down, the application is down. We're having to triage where in the environment is the slowdown, what's going on, is it a security event, or is it just simply them having to reboot their end router? At the end of the day, all the end user sees is that the service is down or slow, and especially if ongoing operations is the service provider, it was creating a terrible user experience, even if we had nothing to do with what the challenge might be. And oh, by the way, the scrutiny in the NCUA has not gone down. And in fact, many of our credit unions have picked up additional assets, taking them above those special magical thresholds of 250 million, 500 million, and $1 billion, and now facing more compliance and security scrutiny than they ever have before from the NCUA and FDIC standards. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that we needed to change. We needed to find a solution, and that's what we did. Starting roughly about almost a year ago now, because of these challenges we're facing, Ongoing Operations began a search for what is that next level of technology that we need to deploy to solve all of these issues and challenges that we were seeing. And since a picture is worth 1,000 words, I wanted to show a typical credit union WAN diagram that we were dealing with, right? So in the middle, you have your headquarters or your main branch that may be connected to a lot of your other branches via an MPLS network, and in many cases, using a VPN over the internet to the additional branches that the MPLS doesn't reach. In many cases, they've got their core outsourced to a Jack Henry or a Fiserv, and so they've got connectivities to not only their primary production side of the core, but also the core DR site. Some of them also had their data center outsourced to a colocation or a managed services provider like Ongoing Operations. And so now you've got additional connections in your spider web between your main location, your primary data center, and your disaster recovery site. Put on top of that you now have permanent VPN set up to all of your remote employees. When there was an issue, when there was a challenge, you're now dealing with trying to debug multiple types of technology, multiple types of connections, routing that probably wasn't designed from the very beginning to be able to handle this level of complexity. We know that we've got issues where the MPLS is not encrypted. The network may be going in and out of encryption across that entire WAN diagram. We've got gaps in the VPN and compliance in the way that we've got end users that are connecting to these environments. And at the end of the day, as we talked about, this additional complexity really just ends up in poor user experience and poor credit union experience. So in looking for our search, and when we went out and to determine what was the best way to solve this across the 140, 150 credit unions that we do business with, we wanted to find a software-defined network solution that we'll talk a little bit about what that means in the future. But number one, designed for security from the ground up. At the end of the day, we've got to meet the security, the encryption, the compliance standards that our credit unions face on a daily basis. It's got to be easier to deploy and manage. If any of you have deployed devices or network or technology out to your branches, in most cases, you're dealing with a non-technical branch manager. It really has to be take tab A and plug into slot B type of easy. And it had to be easy for us to manage with the increase, especially with the increase in tickets. We were not set up to suddenly start managing all of our credit unions users, as I'm sure none of you were, from home, and dealing with, do they have Comcast or Cox? Is it what type of router? Are they on what type of wireless? Which one do they have to reboot? And so on. And then on top of that, getting that holistic view to be able to see the entire network through a single pane of glass and deliver the standard of reporting, auditable reporting that our credit unions require when their examiners come into the door. And so what the TrustGrid solution really does is simplify that spider web that you saw before into a single solution. It's become our standard way of connecting not only us to our credit unions, but our credit unions to all of their branches and all of the third-party connections that they have. You'll hear Joe talk a little bit later about all of the different fintech and core providers that they have TrustGrids deployed into. And the goal is that we're creating really this private, secure financial network that as a credit union comes on board with OGO, they get access to. Another point, it's become our de facto standard so much that Ongoing Operations is rolling out a new solution. We're calling it Enterprise Service Bus, and it's a way for our credit unions to integrate their core to a single set of APIs to get access to every fintech out on the market. That API engine is sitting in the AWS cloud, and in order to create that connectivity, Ongoing Operations has deployed TrustGrid devices into that AWS cloud in order to create that connectivity. It's a shared, secured, encrypted network. So you connect to OGO and you're connected to AWS, or you're connected to the Azure cloud, and so on. Again, creating that single management network to simplify and secure across all of our customers. From a deployment standard, this was also incredibly important to us to make sure that we were not looking at a year to migrate customers over. It had to be very easy, had to be simple. TrustGrid also supplies a team of operators, project managers, and technicians to assist with this as well. They're a great partner in going through this. The solution is cost effective. It is focused on the financial industry, and it's not complex. We literally drop ship devices with simple, I call them Fisher Price type instructions. So any non-technical person can receive the device at the branch. It's really 3 plugs and they're up and running, and then we manage everything remotely. So what are we getting out of this? From a technical perspective, we're now able to provide a full encrypted network across all data in transit for our credit unions, regardless of whether they're going between their branches, between locations, between the public cloud, between their core providers, and so on. It's allowed us to automate our tasks. Now having these software-defined network devices deployed, I'm not having to swap gear in and out. I'm able to manage everything through a single portal, upgrade, and do those complex tasks without having to involve anybody locally at the branches or at the third parties. Continuous security and compliance, meaning I've got a visibility, I've got reporting that I can give to examiners at a moment's notice. I can see across the entire network. And then finally, the tools that allow me to monitor SLAs and availability at every node, at every home location, so that I can show customers to say, hey, you signed up for a 99.99% SLA at this location. I can now show you a report that shows that that's something that we met. From a non-technical perspective, at the end of the day, it's reduced strain on our staff, and it's reduced the strain on our credit union staff. One of the mantras at Ongoing Operations is what we try to do is we really try to take over IT operations in ways that allow our credit unions to not have to think about it, right? They don't want to wake up at night thinking about, did I reclose that port on the firewall? Did I finish my maintenance window? Did I patch that device, and so on? And this solution has really allowed us to deliver that vision to our credit unions. The cost savings, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, has allowed us to replace single connections a lot of times with redundant connections and save the credit union money in doing so, and create a higher availability out to those locations. We're able to solve problems faster because of that global view, that visibility, so that we can see immediately, is it the server? Is it the service provider? Is it us? Is it the home router that's causing the issue? Quickly find the resolution. At the end of the day, creating that better user experience. And then finally, cost. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So what Ongoing Operations is doing, and as we roll this out, like I said, we've got about 140 credit unions that we're providing services for. And the goal is not rip and replace, right? That's very unsettling, very unstable. And a lot of times some of these MPLS contracts are signed up for 5 years. What we're really doing is just replacing the end nodes. So when you go back to that confusing network diagram that I showed, we're not ripping out all of the circuits and the pipes. All we're doing is replacing the internet routers and MPLS routers with these TrustGrid nodes. They're already deployed at our location, so we're connecting to that shared gear. And then we let those MPLS or internet contracts write out the rest of their contract. As they come up for renewal, we're doing price assessments with each one of those customers. And in many cases, replacing those private circuits with redundant internet circuits to redundant TrustGrid appliances to create that high availability experience across every node. It allows us to really white glove the whole solution. It's been a miraculous experience from an implementation, deployment, and management for our customers. So with this said, enough of me talking. We'll hand it over to Joe, and he can show you what this really looks from a management perspective.
Great. Thanks, Ben, and thanks everyone here for your time today. As Ben mentioned early on, a quick re-intro. My name is Joe Galienzer. I'm co-founder and chief product officer here at TrustGrid. And before I jump into the demo, I do want to give you a little bit of background about TrustGrid because it is very relevant, I think, to all of y'all that are here today. TrustGrid was born in the community banking industry. My co-founder and chief technology officer, Steven Stites, came out of Cisco in some of their most high security, high performance networking solutions. We decided to build this product together, and we built it alongside some very large organizations in your industry. Q2 used to be called Q2 eBanking. First Data was one of our early customers, a spin out from there called Aperture with Live Oak Bank. And so we took our technology into those organizations and helped them address the problems that their customers were facing, right? The credit unions and community banks around the United States that were struggling with some of these connectivity issues. And what those credit unions and banks were telling Q2 and First Data and Aperture was that this connectivity solution for them was too much of a hassle, right? They weren't sure when it was up or down. Digital banking, account origination, payments obviously are a more important part of that community banking experience now than at any point in time in history, and has just gotten more important over the last year. And yet here they are with these really hassles involved in dealing with keeping that system up and running, keeping that system secure and patched, making sure that system was compliant. So we listened, very intently to all of that. And then we built the solution. And so we built this solution, really with the goal of solving those challenges, of getting those credit unions and those banks out of the mess of dealing with some of these connectivity challenges, and really having a better overall experience with their IT, whether that is a digital banking or whether that's an internal core banking system, making everything work better, making everything work smoother, and ideally saving them some money at the same time, because we obviously overwhelmingly heard the pressures that today's credit unions and banks are facing in the market. So we started off with listening. In that vein, right, we've now installed at more than 1,000 credit unions and banks all across the country. Those are small banks, very large credit unions, and everything in between. The space represents 60 or 70% of the business today, and we're very invested in the space itself. We're a SOC 2 Type 2 compliant organization. We're very familiar with the compliance challenges and vendor due diligence and vendor management stuff. So we like to make all that very easy on you, right? We're not trying to throw another vendor on the pile to add more work to your plate. This is supposed to be a better experience for you, better encryption, better security, better compliance, and make it easier and less expensive. So with that said, I'm going to show you a few things here around the system that I think demonstrate a lot of those concepts. So I'm going to go ahead and share this out right now. Lance, Ben, can you see that? Is that working?
Yes.
Great. All right. So, obviously, I think everybody in the call today comes at this problem from a few different angles. So I don't want to get too technical with the time that we have, but I do want to emphasize some major aspects of this. And the first piece is that with our partnership with Ongoing, right, we eliminate a lot of the complexity here that goes into the deployment, the management, the support, the patching and updating of these systems. And our goal is to take that burden off the teams at the credit unions in the call today, at the community banks that we service as well. And so when you look at this, I hope at first glance, if you've ever seen a Cisco command line interface or other systems like that, right, we're really trying to democratize a lot of this technology. These things have been needlessly complex for a long time. They've really been very expensive at the same time. They introduce a lot of challenges that shouldn't be there, that they don't have to be there given the current state of technology today. And so we really built this to be a much easier, a much simpler experience for our customers, for those credit unions and banks in the country, and trying to make this as simple as humanly possible for them. So, first glance, hey, there's a lot of stuff on here, but really what we're trying to do is boil this down into a few basic, simple tasks. And this is a very similar interface as your IT team would get. Right, and they want to do just a few basic things. There's really not that much that they should have to do, or that they should have to learn, or should have to know. because the ongoing team and the Trust Grid team are going to take care of the vast majority of the complex stuff. And when the Trust Grid team gets involved to do that, we'd much rather do that automatically. We'd rather write some code to do this so nobody has to do it in the future. A great example of one task is password rotation, right? If you go to your vendors right now that perhaps have a Cisco device in your data centers and say, when's the last time you changed the password on this device? I can tell you from experience, you might not like that answer. Your auditor certainly will not like that answer. It's a very cumbersome task to tackle, especially at the scale that some of these providers that service your industry are operating at. But with the Trust Grid system, right, we don't even use passwords. We've evolved the system to eliminate that problem. We use certificates, which is a much more modern way of doing this. We have a public key infrastructure, which might sound very complex to some. I'm sure some of you guys understand what that is. But it's a way of adding a layer of security that really gets us around the password problem and the key rotation problem. We are responsible still for rotating and managing those, and those have to happen in a compliant and secure way, but all that happens in code. We want to boil this down to very simple things. Am I up and running or am I not? That's one of the most common questions that the Trust Grid customers like Ongoing are getting, right? It's confusing when you're relying on a number of third parties, your internet provider, your MPLS provider, ongoing operations. Is the core banking software the problem? Is it a local problem in our facility? And one of the most difficult questions to solve right away is what is working and where is this problem? And we hear this from our customers every day, from those end users as well, that we just want to see it simply. Tell me what's working and what's not. And so that really is the first thing we're showing here on a Trust Grid solution, right? Is the ability to, with a green circle versus a red circle, to say this thing is working, it's turned on. There's data, right, with these dashboards that we have here. There's data passing on the circuit, and that gives your internal IT teams, it gives the Ongoing team and the Trust Grid team a much better chance at solving that problem right away out of the gate. In many cases, the number one problem that we see, probably not surprisingly, is internet connectivity outages, right? And those are something that Ongoing can assist with, Trust Grid can assist with, your team can assist with, but ultimately somebody's got fiber or copper into your data centers and branch offices. That's a local internet provider. It's an AT&T, it's a CenturyLink or Lumen, they're now called. But we want to get them engaged in solving that problem very quickly and get you guys back up and running, because ultimately, right, that the internet being down isn't an excuse that any of your customers want to hear as to why they can't access their banking system, why they can't get an answer from one of your employees on a loan or other issue they're dealing with your bank. So we'll drill down a little bit more into this and see more of this. So, what you're seeing here is the ongoing operations view. If you're a credit union with 7 or 10 or 12 branches, you might see a very similar view. If you've got a handful of branches, you're going to see a shorter list here, and that's fine. But we're going to see the version of software it's running. Hey, are these guys really doing what they're supposed to be doing? That's certainly not an issue, I think, for most Ongoing customers, but I'd be surprised if you in your past haven't dealt with IT vendors, might have promised one thing and maybe not delivered it entirely. But even when you trust them completely, you still want to verify that this work is being done. So let's make sure it's getting updated and patched. And oh, look, here's one on a little bit older version than the rest. And why is that? Let me be able to ask some good questions here. Let me drill down into a device within my data center. What's happening on this device? Do I want to call the Ongoing Operations support team right out of the gate? Or do I want to gather some information on my own first and make some good decisions, save myself some time when I'm trying to solve a problem within a credit union, within a branch office or so on. So, here we can see right away, okay, look, there's data here. There's data that might have taken me much longer to get to and require a much higher level of skill on the prior solution than what I get with a Trust Grid solution. This is not that hard to figure out. Hey, my CPU is 1% used. I don't think I'm running into a problem here with excess compute consumption on an appliance. I don't think that's the bottleneck that might be causing slowness on the internet or slowness when accessing my core banking application hosted at Ongoing. I can see my traffic volume, and I can look at longer periods of time, right? I don't have to be constrained to this last hour. Hey, has it always done this? Is this normal? That's a very difficult question to answer sometime without access to a lot of this data that is stored within the Trust Grid system. One question that often comes up that I think is really important to point out as well is what happens to your data, right? So Trust Grid has this appliance in your data center. You're accessing a core banking application hosted in the ongoing data centers. Where does that data go? Is it going through TrustGrid? And the answer is absolutely not, right? The way that we built this system with the input from these providers we talked about earlier within your industry, so we want the data to go straight from the branch to the data center, to the ongoing data center, straight from the branch or the credit union data center into the fintech provider, the digital banking provider, or account origination provider. We don't want TrustGrid in the middle of that. And so what we see, the only data that TrustGrid sees is this data here. We refer to as metadata. So I can see that your device is working, right? I can see that things are happening normally. I can see that we can configure the network interfaces here very easily. I can see these IP addresses, but there's never account information, never account holder information, never dollars accessible in any part of this system. Should ongoing need to get access to that data for troubleshooting purposes, just to help solve problems, they have some methods to do that with your permission, but the TrustGrid team and the TrustGrid service really isn't any part of that. So we'll talk about some basic options here in terms of configuration and how this works. This is a problem that a lot of our customers are facing on a regular basis. My internet provider is changing. I got a better deal on internet. I'm getting faster internet for less money. Let's go ahead and make the change. Well, how many Cisco devices do you have in your data centers today that will now be affected by that? How many support calls do you have to make to go get this work done? Do you even have access to those devices that are going to the Fed or that are going to Visa or that historically have gone to ongoing operations to make those changes? And that answer is probably no. You're going to go open a support ticket and have to coordinate a fairly substantial amount of work to do a fairly easy change of an internet provider. TrustGrid makes that much easier. The ability to change IP addresses here, change DNS service providers, change what you want. And then one of my favorite features here is the try button, right? Because we all make mistakes, because perhaps we got wrong information from the ISP, but I want to click try. I want to make sure that it's working. Maybe I'm at home. Maybe I didn't go into the data center to make this change. And I don't want to have a lack of connectivity, right? What a big fear that is for many IT personnel. The try button says, hey, go ahead and make the change. And if it comes back up and it can phone home to ongoing and it can phone home to TrustGrid, keep it. But if not, let's go ahead and pull it back, use the last IP address and keep access for me so I can make additional changes and figure out what's wrong. And that really is one of the big, I would say, advantages and benefits to the end user, to the internal IT teams at credit unions or to the ongoing team, is that TrustGrid is always working from the presumption that things are going to go wrong, right? We know this. We've been in this industry for a long time. We've worked with those Cisco solutions and Juniper solutions and Fortinet solutions. And whether I was the one that made the mistake on entering the IP address, or whether the system didn't quite perform the way it does, we want to have failbacks. We want to have options. I don't want to put anybody in a corner that allows them to not be able to troubleshoot a solution, especially when most of this work is getting done from home now, right? We're not going to be at the branch office all the time. Maybe that branch office is hundreds of miles away. And as Ben was mentioning earlier, right, there's a non-technical person there. Very few organizations are going to staff a technician at every branch. In fact, I don't know of any. We want to be able to manage those systems in a way that makes sure that we always have remote connectivity to it, that we're not going to have to get in the car and drive across the state or the region to go solve a problem. So this is one example of that, but it's one of many. Another good one I can think of is the patching process right now. Another question you might want to ask some of those fintech providers you're working with that have those Cisco devices in your data center is, when's the last time this was patched? And in fact, we hear this a lot from credit unions that have this ongoing audit conversation or compliance conversation with their providers. Hey, my device isn't patched. It's 10 patches back. The auditor took note of that, and now it's my problem, not your problem. When can we get this done? The TrustGrid system automates all those patches. It automates the process of installing them, configuring them. And so nobody at ongoing or TrustGrid has to get involved with that. Obviously, we're always watching. Everybody's making sure that it goes well, because I'm sure everybody in the call has been through scenarios where it did not go well. But TrustGrid accommodates that as well. So when it doesn't go well, we have failbacks and last known goods, you're probably familiar with that term, and fail safes to phone home and make sure we have remote access in those events, which rarely happen, but it sure is nice when they do. Let's look at a few of these options here too. We talk about auditors, right? And we want to make sure that we have good change control in place. Many of you are going to have to open change tickets to get a TrustGrid appliance installed or to patch or maintain a device. we want to know who did what on these devices, right? We want to know exactly what's going on. This is a user that's logging in and making changes to some SNMP settings. Great, now we have that. We have audit level activity to this. Who's connecting? What are they doing when they're connecting? This obviously helps in troubleshooting. Hey, somebody broke something. Who was the last person to log in? But we also have the ability to say, nothing's broken. Let's just prove to the auditor in 2 seconds that everything is fine, instead of having to go through a more cumbersome process or use third-party tools for this. This is all a built-in solution. Flow logs are an important one here. I'm on the wrong one to show you this. But if I go over here, you can see them. You probably have flow logs right now going to a third-party service, maybe SolarWinds, maybe not these days, but some way to store these flow logs, right? Those are critical from a security perspective, very critical from a troubleshooting perspective. TrustGrid storing those in this portal right here. Let me go look back at last Tuesday and see what was happening on my network back then. Let's get from 11:30 over to today at 12:30 and go run that search and see what was going on and drill down and help identify why the user experience at my branch office wasn't up to par. Why do I have users out there that were complaining that they couldn't get their job done because of slowness or some other issue? We want to give you that data to solve those problems very quickly. Other things you might be familiar with, SNMP integration. If you have SolarWinds, you're still running that, or some other monitoring tool, you want to do that, great, keep that solution. Configure alerts and alarms so you have better visibility to a lot of this data. All built in here to the system. I'm going to jump over and show you a few more things, because one thing the pandemic did do for TrustGrid, and I know for Ongoing has been mentioned earlier, is change the way people are accessing the resources. We went from an environment where everybody was in a branch office, especially in the community banking space, where work from home might have been a once in a while kind of thing, or when you're ill, or when kids got a doctor's appointment or whatever, to a part of life, right? And we wanted to give them better capabilities to access the applications where TrustGrid was already installed, where their VPN solution was falling short of the experience they were needing. So there's a lot of different reasons behind that one, but what I want to show you right now is the TrustGrid agentless remote access solution. And what do I mean by that? Agentless meaning you don't have to put a VPN client on your home-based desktop or laptop. That was a substantial challenge for a lot of credit unions around the country. They sent home devices for sure. They're obviously well-configured, well-secured devices in this space. And the user didn't have admin access, right? They weren't the local admin in the box. They couldn't update the Cisco AnyConnect application, or they couldn't deploy the new VPN appliance. Maybe that VPN appliance was designed for 25 people, and now I've got 100 people working from home, and I've switched providers. How do I solve these challenges of having to manage these remote devices? So we built this to really overcome those challenges. We didn't want to be dependent on a VPN connection to get work done, but we still wanted to offer state-of-the-art security, right? We didn't want to compromise in any way, shape, or form on security or compliance. So we built this solution here. So we log into this portal. It's going to make me, obviously, use my two-factor authentication, because this is a very secure solution. You guys can write that down if you want. It's only good for a few seconds. And then it's going to show me the applications that I have access to. I want to point out here as well that you've got integration here to Active Directory through Azure AD. You've got integration to Okta. You've got integration. So this is not another password that somebody has to remember. That came up a lot in the early days of the pandemic, as well as my VPN users have been used to logging in their Windows desktop for years, and I've just burdened them with another password that they've got to remember, another password that from an IT perspective has to be managed and reset and recycled. So, same credentials you use everywhere else, get you access here and get you access to the applications you want. If you're technical, you might be thinking through this and say, well, heck, my credit union has applications that aren't accessible via the web, right? They're not going to be a port 80 or port 443 is how I would think of it. Many of you might as well. How would this possibly work? And the answer is the HTML5, right? Is of course a very powerful system. And so I can do things like a remote desktop here without a remote desktop agent on my client in any way, shape, or form. This is demo gods are after me here. Let's try it again. They were just kidding that first time. So here we're logging in right to a desktop, perhaps a desktop I left at the branch office that now is accessible through through my website, through a web portal without any agent installed. I can get to Teams, I can Word, I can
we're still on the login.
Oh, are we,
the VDI icon.
Yeah, I did that last time too, didn't I? There you go. So this is my remote desktop, right? A Windows solution here that I can access all my Windows stuff. I can print remotely, print locally, drag and drop files. I can get all the RDP type experience through the web. But that isn't the only thing I can do, right? And that is, I dropped it again. I can access my web applications. If your core banking supports a web interface, which many of them do today, but I can log into an application here. Let me show you this one, actually. It's a better one. This one's installed locally, where I'm not required to publish my core banking application to the web, right, to let anyone access it. In fact, there is no firewall rule change required for this at all. This is a web application with no internet exposure whatsoever that's going over the TrustGrid secure network that we're handling all the security on, but it's going to work the same as if you were logged in there in the branch office. So I'm running a bit out of time here. I know we've got some other things to cover, but I wanted to show you this piece as well. I think it's very important to help empower those users that are working from home. And as Ben mentioned, you know, probably will be for some time still. Most of the folks we're talking to have a long-term plan for some or many of their employees to be a remote worker. So Ben, with that, I will turn it over to you again. And I want to thank everybody for your time.
Real quick, it's also important to note that that remote access is actually running on the same node as the WAN connection.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so no other software required. The same solution that's doing your SD-WAN or doing your connectivity back to Ongoing is also handling this. And I'd add to that as well, unlike a next generation firewall or VPN appliance, right? It's not constrained to a fixed number of users. It's not leveraging the processor on that firewall to connect. So it can handle all of your users quite easily.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. So, you know, as you see, it very powerful tool. And not only that, being a QSO, another one of our mantras is to make sure that we are looking out for the best interests of our credit unions that we're providing services for. And one of those is, you know, the best service for the price. And that was also another part of, you know, how we evaluated TrustGrid and looking at the fact that we're seeing a return on investment with every single migration and implementation that we're doing with TrustGrid. And that's not just upfront. That's not just when we replace current Cisco equipment or Juniper equipment or FortiGate equipment. It's down the line. So as there are changes, as there are upgrades required, looking at year after year, the fact that we're continuing to see those cost savings if you were to compare these technologies side by side. And that was really important because most of our relationships with credit unions are very, very long term. And so we have to make sure that we're sending them down the right path. We talked a little bit about the single platform connecting to all the environments, ensuring that we've got the zero trust network, as well as connecting with those end user parties as well. Again, a single solution, ensuring that we've got that full encryption across everything and wrapping everything up with that single portal that allows ongoing operations to manage this with the highest level of customer experience. I also wanted to share a little bit of nitty gritty in some of the pricing so that you all can see the solution, what it is. It's per node. And so that's when you see that $250 per month per node. And that's all in with the hardware, with the services, the monitoring. That's a fully managed solution on TrustGrid. You do not have to purchase any nodes at Ongoing Operations. We already have a full network TrustGrid mesh deployed at all of our locations. And depending on your fintech and or core hosting provider, Joe and Lance do get involved in some of these campaigns. They also have a lot of TrustGrid devices deployed at a lot of those providers as well. So in many cases, you're really only just covering your locations. And so there's a fixed fee for implementation. There's a fixed monthly fee per site, per node. Again, trying to keep it simple and hit the budgets of our credit union customers. We also are running a little bit of a special right now. So with the purchase of a node, we are including the VPN user connectivity for the first year up to 50 users. So if any of you are looking at, possibly looking at replacing your AnyConnect or your VPN solutions right now, some of the credit unions are still looking at upsizing their VPN solutions because they still haven't, even through the pandemic days. Now might be a good time to do that and get the additional savings this year. So just to end off on why TrustGrid and why ongoing operations, one of the things that we've learned with working credit unions over the last 16 years is no one wants to be the first. You don't want to be the first in the cloud. You don't want to be the first to try remote core hosting and so on and so forth. So it was really important for us to go with TrustGrid, who is extremely experienced and like Joe said, deployed at hundreds of credit unions and small community banks across the nation today. So very much focused on that financial industry. And then partnering with a QSO like Ongoing Operations, which all we do is manage services, manage hosting, and manage network for credit unions, over 150 customers, 15 years of experience. We're really built, and this solution is really built for you and your organizations. And with that, Lance, back to you.
Yeah, that was a great presentation, guys. We did get a few questions come in over the Q&A line. I'll just go ahead and dive right into them. The first one is, as far as experiences with implementation, what does timing and staff requirements look like?
I'll take that, Lance. So great question. So two things that have greatly simplified implementation and migrations. Number one, like I mentioned, we already have a lot of the non-credit union nodes deployed, whether that is at Ongoing Operations or a lot of those fintech locations. And so that part is immediately reduced. The complexity is reduced. Number two, with the assistance of the TrustGrid team and the fact that we're able to replace node by node, it's not only increased the speed in which we've done it, but it's reduced the change window. So when we actually have to do a maintenance window at a location to replace and keep the communications open, has been greatly improved. So where we've seen it, long story short, we've seen 6-month migrations get cut down to 90 days in the migrations that we've done so far.
Okay. Average cost savings when moving from MPLS?
That's another good question. Right now, we're seeing a reduction in cost anywhere between 20 and 40% when migrating off the MPLS and to TrustGrid over the internet. The reason for the range is twofold. It kind of depends on when the MPLS circuits were purchased, how old, and how good that negotiation was. But the other thing we're seeing is even when customers are moving from a single MPLS connection to redundant internet connections, in many cases, there's still a cost savings. And that's where that 20% comes in place, where the customer is now getting not only full encryption, but full encryption to high availability connections at each one of their branches, and still saving cost savings over MPLS.
Okay. And last question was in regards to automated patching. when the nodes are updated? Are these scheduled? Are we alerted before these updates happen so that we can prepare?
Yeah, I think I answered that one directly anyway, but I'll make sure everybody else can hear that information as well, because it is obviously a big deal. So Trustcode recommends deployment in high availability pairs, right? Two devices. The cost of these devices is typically quite a bit lower than what you've been paying for other systems, Cisco devices, for instance. I'll pick on a little bit. So it's easy to get two of them in there, and then the ability to move traffic to the second device, update the first one, and so on. We have some very structured methods to do that to make sure everything goes fine. The impact on connectivity is measured in seconds in that case, and always during scheduled maintenance windows. So that's going to be communicated. We work that out with Ongoing. They're working that out with you. I've been doing that for years, and I've got that down to a fine science. You'll not be surprised by anything during that process. It'll be incredibly easy from your perspective.
Yeah, so to more specific, our standard maintenance windows are 11 p.m. Eastern to 7 a.m. Eastern. And we typically give a week to 2 weeks notice before a maintenance window. We do work out custom maintenance windows for certain customers for exceptions.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. That's the rest of our questions. And thank you to our audience. We appreciate you attending, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.